Would you share some of your observations on where the gospel is really thriving? I would be curious to hear about the arc. So if, let's say, Indonesia is experiencing a real growth in the church, was the history behind that missionaries came 100 years ago and now the indigenous church has taken that up? So could you speak about those kind of topics?
Again, it depends very much where you are. There are parts of the world where the gospel is very slow, or else where there's such telling persecution and opposition that it's being crushed. Albania, for example, managed under its Marxist regime to kill every known church above ground or beneath the ground. There were no known public Christians in Albania when Ceausescu passed on. Today, the church in Albania is growing. I was speaking at a conference of Southeast Asia and met some fine Albanian pastors who've been converted in the last 5 years, and the church is growing in Albania. It's a day of small things, but it's growing. I was talking to someone yesterday on email. 2 years ago, I was in Ukraine, and that was followed up by work in Moscow and Novosibirsk, Siberia. You couldn't fly from one place to the other because they weren't talking to each other. They had no public relations. I had to fly to Minsk, Belarus, to get to the next place. And I could tell you some things that I've learned in watching those churches. But the evangelical confessional church in Ukraine is growing. It's growing faster than the population. In Russia, it's seen some growth in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's not nearly as per capita strong, as far as I can see, as Ukraine. On the other hand, now with what's going on, when we think of what's going on in the current conflict, which Russia does not want to call a war, an invasion, but a military special operation, it's right that we should be aware politically what's going on. It's wrong that we should make that our whole hope for the future. We should be praying for the advance of the gospel. If our fears are being fueled by current political agendas primarily, then we're looking at the world no differently than the world looks at the world. So we have to know these things, and some of us have responsibilities that are political or military or whatever. My son's a Marine. So I'm aware of that world. But at the end of the day, we still serve King Jesus. And so we want people to be aware, as your question presupposes, of what the gospel is doing here, there, and everywhere. Parts of Africa have, it's often said, I think John Stott first coined the expression, Christianity that's 3,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep. Lots and lots and lots of numbers, but not much growth, not much depth. But on the other hand, there are certain movements now that are changing that gradually. So that an awful lot of Christendom in Africa is prosperity gospel type stuff, with only a marginal connection with the gospel of the cross. But that's changing now too. And same in Latin America. So there are many parts of the world where the gospel is advancing. And other parts where nothing is happening above ground. It's amazing how much you can do and you can get done if you keep a low profile. But nowadays there are search engines that scan for certain words from public addresses and so on, and you get people in all kinds of trouble. So I want to tell you the truth. I'm happy to give names and addresses and so on in certain contexts, but not in a public context like this one. But by and large, I am more encouraged than discouraged by the events of the last 15 years, as opposed to, let's say, the previous 15 years, because of the advance of the gospel. And even the discouraging things, the things that make Christians increasingly uncomfortable in many parts of the U.S., have the positive effect of making it clearer who's a Christian and who's not. On the long haul, that's bound to be good, even if on the short haul it's distinctly uncomfortable. Jesus said, "In this world you shall have trouble." He said, "There will be wars and rumors of wars. Be not dismayed, the end is not yet." So you don't want to get into a situation where you're assessing things according to the state of the war in Eastern Europe. That you can assess that for that area. But what God may be doing on the long haul through such struggle, I have no idea. I have no idea. I just pray that King Jesus will display his power and glory.